Hello students, welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am Dr. Renu Tyagi from Department of Anthropology, University of Delhi. Today I am going to speak on development of cultural ecology and its different theories. The learning objectives of this module are: number 1, it will help the students to understand the development of cultural ecology. Number 2, this module will enable the students to gain insight into different concepts in cultural ecology. Number 3, this module will equip the students to study cultural ecology and its different theories. Now we will talk briefly about the introduction of the module. Ecology is the study of interaction between living things and their environment. Human ecology is the study of relationship and interaction among humans, their biology, their culture and their physical environment. The phrase cultural ecology was first used by the anthropologist Julian Stewart and Leslie White in 1950s. It was defined by Stewart as the adaptive processes by which the nature of society and an unpredictable number of features of culture are affected by the basic adjustment through which man utilizes a given environment. It has come to mean the study of all aspects of interactions between human culture and their ecological environments. Like other sciences, much of the cultural ecology is classificatory and descriptive. In particular, cultural ecologists commonly distinguish among societies with different subsistence patterns, such as ways of making a living from nature, distinguishing in particular among hunting and gathering, horticultural, pastoral and intensive agricultural societies. Figure 1 presents the cultural ecology looks into the interaction between human and the environment surrounding them. As per cultural evolution, it has long been recognized that culture change over time, although it was not understood how or why. Not until after the new theory of biological evolution given by Darwin had been proposed did a comprehensive theory of cultural evolution develop. Unilinear cultural evolution. The first major theory in anthropology was the concept that cultures evolved upward along a single line. This idea was developed by Lewis Morgan and amplified by Edward Taylor and others, and this is later known as the unilinear cultural evolution. It was proposed that culture evolved progressively through 3 basic stages, from savagery, that is hunting and gathering, to barbarism, that is pastoralism, later agriculture, and then up to civilization. This view encompassed the 19th century notion of progress. Morgan saw human life as search for livelihood, that is subsistence of food, clothing and shelter. He was aware that humans need social life and a sense of control over their world, but thought of these as constant, while ways of obtaining food and therefore technology varied according to the local creativity and local environment. Morgan held that certain inventions such as the bow and arrow, pottery and agriculture were keystones in cultural evolution. Each one led to a new higher phase of society. Figure 2 depicts the unilinear cultural evolution. At about the same time, Marx and Engels proposed a 6-stage theory of unilinear cultural evolution, but with politics and economics rather than technology being the most important factor. It was proposed that societies would ultimately evolve to advanced communism, the pinnacle of development. From the point of view of contemporary human ecology, perhaps the most important contribution of evolutionary idea of Marx and Engels was the assertion of creativity and resourcefulness of human being. Earlier thinkers, that is Montesquieu, gave nature pride of place and claimed that nature determined culture. Marx and Engels gave human creativity pride of place over nature, and this is a point that has come to lie behind much contemporary human ecological work. the theory of unilinear cultural evolution was accepted throughout the social sciences in 19th century, only to be disproved in the early 20th century, partly due to the understanding that technology alone does not dominate cultures, and partly due to the realization that historical processes was an important factor. However, it is still recognized that technological innovations have played a major role in cultural change and that certain innovations are more important than the others. The use of unilinear cultural evolution, a tripartite division of hunting, gathering, pastoralism and agriculture, has also survived and is still widely employed by anthropologists, but now only as a classificatory scheme, not as a description of evolutionary progress. Whatever their details, cultural evolutionary theory proposed a relationship between culture and environment, including natural, political, social and technological environments. Even today, the details of how culture evolves remains unresolved, but it is clear that there is a relationship between environment and cultural change. Now, let us see what is multilinear cultural evolution. By the early 20th century, the unilinear cultural evolution model was in trouble. Key postulates such as the idea that herding preceded agriculture were not standing up under investigation. Worse, the simple scheme of progress as proceeding through neat regular stage was inadequate to deal with the accumulating ethnographic data. It was also realized that food was not the only thing people got from the environment. Early theories like contemporary ones such as optimal foraging theory dealt almost exclusively with food, but in fact other activities such as art and religion also draw on resources. Figure 3 shows arrow which indicates the range of evolution. No culture evolved at the same rate. Arthur Herman pointed out that Adam Smith could observe all these stages, that is foraging, herding, farming and commerce in the Scotland of his time, without having to leave home. Some hunter-gatherers such as those into the Pacific coast of North America had exceedingly complex social and technological system, much more complex than those of many farmers. It was realized that if cultural evolution were to survive as a theory, it would have to be viewed as following many lines. Thus, Julian Stewart proposed multilinear evolution. Now, let us see what is neo-evolution. Despite the rejection of cultural evolutionary model in early 90s, by the middle of 20th century, many anthropologists began to accept the reality that cultural evolution had occurred even if in a multilinear way. Leslie White, one of the founders of the ecological tradition in anthropology, made an attempt to revive unilinear cultural evolution by framing it in a new way, that is neo-evolution. White argued that cultures evolved as they increased their control of energy sources from fire to animal power to coal to oil to electricity to thermonuclear power. At every stage we become more adept at using greater and greater amount of energy. Contemporary theorists would add that we increase in ability to use energy more efficiently and to control it better. Leslie White expressed this in summary from CET, where C stands for culture, E for energy and T for technology. It was not intended to be taken as literal mathematics. Leslie White did not argue that United States is twice as advanced as Sweden because it used twice as much energy per capita, but He was arguing, rightly or wrongly, that energy and the means of harnessing it are basic to a culture, in a way that art styles or dynastic genealogies are not. Next was the tribe, consisting of larger, more or less settled groups of hunter-gatherers or incipient agriculturists, that is horticulturist or pastoralist, with several settlements and relatively former decision making authority, but still no centralized authority. Third was the chiefdom, which had large sedentary population, usually of agriculturists, elite, some social stratification and leaders with the authority to impose their will. And last was the state, sometimes called civilization, a highly loaded term, a large and complex system based on grain agriculture with larger and more dense populations. Complex social and political structures, elaborate record keeping, urban centers or cities, central authority, monumental architecture and specializations. While there has been much criticism of this scheme, it is still widely utilized by anthropologists to describe political entities and ecological adaptations. This would have band level hunter-gatherer as the original societies, with some evolving to tribe in the sense of local independent settlement or groups of about 500 to 1000 persons. With the incorporation of agriculture or sophisticated hunting gathering as the economic base, some tribes grew into chiefdoms. Some tribes and chiefdoms under certain circumstances developed into states. While there is ample archaeological and other evidences of this general trend, there is no reason to believe such evolution has been unidirectional, still less good or bad. Let us understand the concept of possibilism. As anthropologists began to accumulate more general knowledge of culture and detailed knowledge of specific cultures, it became apparent that culture was highly adaptive, that most environment had been modified by humans, that there was a variety of responses possible to most environmental situations, and that culture were considerably influenced by other cultures. There was no illusion that an environment did not influence culture, but it became clear that it did not dictate it. In possibilism, the environment is seen as a limiting or enabling factor rather than a determining factor. To be sure, the environment may deny certain possibilities, such as the use of snow houses in Arabia, but will open a variety of other possibilities, such as houses of wood, grass, mud, cloth, stone or skins, all of which occur in Arabia. The culture makes the choice of which of the possibilities to employ. The culture also has limiting factors, including technology, belief system and extra-cultural relations. In our housing example above, metal houses are a possibility offered by the environment. For example, iron ore exists. But if a culture does not possess the technology to mine, process and fabricate metal, it is not really a choice. In fact, however, possibilism is deterministic from the standpoint that some options are excluded and the solutions are limited to a subset of all possibilities, determination of which are possible and which are not. Possibilism seems much more realistic than strict determinism, as the role of culture is considered to some extent. Human culture has a penchant for changing the conditions and rule as human cultural institution, and technology became more complex. The environment seems to play less role and less of a role in limiting or determining human responses and adaptation. Therefore, possibilism has been frequently criticized as not being a theory at all, as it predicts nothing specific. It is difficult to refute this argument. Now let us understand the rise of cultural ecology. While always embedded in general anthropological theory, cultural ecology did not come into its own until after the late 1930s, primarily through the work of Julian Stewart. He began his career working with the poet Shoshone people of the Great Basin in western North America, but later worked in the South America and eventually in Puerto Rico, a colonial type society in the contemporary world. He was one of the first anthropologists to look at complex societies and their place in the even more complex world of today. Stewart also drew on the concept of possibilism. Societies could adapt in any of a number of possible directions rather than being subject to environmental determinism. Stewart's concept on ecology. Stewart was the first to combine four approaches in studying the interaction between culture and environment. Number 1, an explanation of culture in terms of the environment where it existed rather than just a geographic association with economy. Number 2, the relationship between culture and environment as a process, not just a correlation. Number 3, a consideration of small scale environment rather than culture area size regions. And number 4, the connection of ecology and multilinear cultural evolution. Stewart's landmark ecological work of Basin Plateau Aboriginal socio-political group dealt with the native people of Great Basin. In his work, he described the general environment, listed important resources and then discussed those resources which were utilized. He then discussed the socio-political patterns and how they related to technology, the environment and the distribution of resources. His approach was groundbreaking. Stewart's primary argument were that number 1, culture in similar environment may have similar adaptations. Number 2, all adaptations are short-lived and are constant adjusting to the changing environments. And number 3, changes in the culture can elaborate existing culture or results in entirely new ones. Stewart coined the term cultural ecology to describe his approach and is frequently referred to as the father of ecological studies. Stewart in 1955 recognized that the ecology of humans had both distinct biological and distinct cultural aspects, though they were intertwined. He argued that the cultural aspect was associated with the technology which sets human and their culture above and separate them from the rest of the environment. While Stewart was correct in recognizing the difference between the biological and cultural aspect of human ecology, he was wrong to view humans as separate from the rest of the environment. The new ecological approach, while Stewart tied the culture into the environment, a new approach called the new ecology tied culture into the emerging science of system ecology. It was argued that human culture were not unique but formed only one of the population units interacting to form food webs, biotic communities and ecosystems. This approach placed human within a unified science of ecology so that what was learned about human behavior would have greater applicability. This approach has had the effect of moving the analysis of human behavior from strictly qualitative ethnography to quantitative science, leading to a whole new way to look at humans. One of the weaknesses of this approach is that analysis is based on the data that describes situation at a single point in a time, while variables can be measured and compared to each other and relationship between variables can be described and modeled. It is difficult to model the cultural change and evolution using such data. This problem is also an issue with much of the more recent works, such as the use of optimization models. Another weakness is that systems in ecology have proved to be more difficult to analyze than they seemed in 1960s and are often chaotic and weakly bounded. Vidya has thus moved toward what he calls event ecology, analyzing particular events and their complex causes rather than systems. Cultural materialism emphasizes very empirical phenomena such as technology, economy, that is food, environment and population, takes an evolutionary perspective and has an unwavering commitment to the rule of Western science. Marvin Harris espoused a concept of techno-environment materialism that initially held that all the cultural institutions could be explained by direct material payoff. Harris did not claim that this always provided a total explanation. He saw it as a research strategy. One starts by looking for a direct material payoff, typically in food calories, for a cultural institution. If that is inadequate, look for a payoff in protein or in a shelter. Only when all material payoff have been eliminated should one investigate the psychological and sociological factors. But only if one remembers to carry out the whole agenda, looking to psychology and society when necessary, as Harris did in his later work. Materialists tend to look at the specifics rather than the trends and at the distinctive traits rather than the general ones. The task was to explain the trait and why it is done in that particular way. Detractors would consider this approach to be biased away from non-material aspect of culture, often overlooking important if not critical information. Proponents would argue that the overlooked information is not empirical and so not science. Nonetheless, cultural materialism has formed the basis for much anthropological research since 1960s. Marvin Harris and the sacred cow concept. Now, let us understand this concept. An example of the functionalist materialist approach is the analysis of the role of sacred cow in India. To Hindus, cows are sacred and cannot be eaten. Hindu religion include a belief in reincarnation, and so it is possible that a relative may have been reincarnated as a cow, and eating the cow would be equivalent to cannibalism. To many Westerners who eat beef on an almost daily basis, it seems silly to have starving people refusing to eat their cows. However, an analysis of the function in Indian society of cows revealed that they were simply too important to eat. First, cows provide labor for ploughing. Few farmers could afford a tractor and there was no infrastructure for the support of such machines. Also, cow dung was used as a fertilizer and fuel. No substitute were available and the fields had to have some fertilizer to maintain the productivity. Cow did not have to be fed, they survived by foraging the trash and weeds. Also helps in keeping the area clean. In addition, they provide milk, a renewable resource. Thus, slaughtering the cows for food would provide a wonderful few weeks of steak and ribs, but would also result in no labor to pull plough, no fertilizer, no fuel, no milk, the need for weed or the trash disposal, the rapid collapse of the entire agricultural system, and the death of millions by famine. However, the cows are eventually eaten when they age and are incapable to provide the desired output. When cows dies naturally, member of the untouchables, the lowest caste in Indian society, butcher them, eat the meat and manufacture useful products from their skin and other parts. It is a system that functions well under these circumstances. However, it does not necessarily explain the origin of the practice. Rational choice theory. Currently, one paradigm in environmental social science is some form of rational choice theory. This theory, popular in economics and political science as well as in some fields of anthropology. It asserts that people decide how to achieve their goals on the basis of deliberate individual consideration of all available information, that they seek but better information as required, and that they are good calculators of their chances, that they know where to hunt deer, which crop will grow, and how to trade off the potential yield of hunting deer versus cultivating crops. Some would consider rational choice theory to be related to evolutionary ecology, because poor choices would be subject to negative selective pressure. Thus, people have evolved to make better choices. It is true that much conventional behavior is rationally chosen. Some behavior is not rational, however, even if there is a seemingly reasonable argument made for such conduct. It has been argued that whole Western attitude towards nature is cultural and irrational. Westerners tend to regard nature as something separate from humans, ours to exploit and ruin at will. This belief is neither scientifically sensible nor conducive to maximizing any of the many resources we get from the non-human world. A rational chooser would choose to believe something quite different. Rational choice is an indispensable tool of human ecological analysis, but it leaves a good deal for us to explain. In fact, it leaves almost all the content of culture for us to explain. We might freely grant that all cultural practices were adopted because they seemed at one time the most rational thing to do under the existing circumstances, like cultural materialism. Rational choice make a good starting place for an analysis. It is not usually the final resting place. Now, let us understand political ecology. A recent development in human ecology is the rapid spread of political ecology. This term was coined by Steward student Eric Wolf in 1972. It was popularized in mid-1980s and became particularly popular in geography. Political ecology is concerned with the power relations and specifically with the day-to-day conflicts, alliances and negotiation that ultimately result in some sort of definitive behavior. It directs our attention to immediate process and conflicts. It also notably concerned with the scale, analyzing conflict from the household level to the local to the global level. It has therefore meaningfully supplemented the other branches of human ecology that tend to look at the long term, but that even ignore the wide scale. Where cultural ecology tend to focus on a particular small ethnic group over a long time, political ecology tend to focus on large forces impinging on a community at one point in time. The field of political ecology rose rapidly in late 1980s and 1990s, heavily influenced by contemporary economic and political theories. Perhaps most important of these influences was environmental politics. Worldwide battle between exploiters and conservationists have always had a serious impact on indigenous communities. Biology and culture have been brought back into the fold. Political and cultural ecology continue to blend into each other. In recent years, cultural political ecology has been increasingly influenced by world system theory. This theory was developed largely by Immanuel Wallerstein in 1976. He began to look seriously at the interconnections of societies around the world, going beyond the simple rich, poor and developed, less developed contrast to see how the rise of one society may lead to or be linked with the fall of the other. He separated the world into cores: the rich nation, Europe, North America and Japan today, China and the Near East 1,000 years ago. Peripheries of poor and isolated societies and semi-peripheries. The last are the countries in between the fairly well-off but the much poverty and displaying a contrast of highly developed and much less developed sectors. Countries like Mexico, Turkey and China provide current example in the world of 1,000 years ago. Southernmost Europe qualified, the rest was periphery, and so did much of Southeast Asia. Long cycles of empire and dominance occur reflected in economic swings and geographic shift of power. Wallerstein's theory has been used to evaluate the rise and fall of culture and the problem of smaller, more remote societies in today's world and in their own earlier worlds, where they could create small local world system. Unlike cultural ecology, which nests in anthropology, political ecology now involves geographers, political scientists, environmental scientists and others as well as anthropologists. In spite of some polemic basic introduction, the field are at least complementary and we view them more as two aspects of the same thing. Both are solidly derivative of the Stewardian agenda. Historical ecology. Recently, the number of terms in the human ecological fields has been increased by the addition of historical ecology. The term has been around at least since the 1970s, when Edward Dewey directed a historical ecology project at University of Florida. This field is close to environmental history, landscape history and similar historical subfields as well as to cultural geography. In practice, it has been something of a blend of these fields, anthropology with more historical detail than usual or history with more holistic cultural and environmental data than usual. A specific theory for this subfield was proposed by William Bailey, who emphasized interactions dialectical in his usage between people and environment, with the two being active players rather than as humans merely adapting to the environment. Bailey argued that number one, human activity has affected virtually all environments. Number two, human activity does not necessarily degrade or improve the environment. Number three, different cultural systems have different impact on their environment. And number four, human interaction with the environment can be understood as a total phenomena. This directs attention to individual actions as opposed to such things as evolutionary dynamics, cultural ideologies or social systems. These latter are the abstractions that do not really interact per se. Historical ecologists, like other human ecologists, in recent years have paid much attention to the influence of small-scale societies on their environment. Such people were once dismissed as primitive and savage, who had minimal effect on their surroundings, who were, according to earlier formulations, part of nature rather than culture in short. Historical ecology focuses much more on change, contingency and human agency than did some of other traditions within cultural ecology. In this, it continues a long-standing agenda in the field. The counter agendas include evolutionary ones, whether Darwinian or cultural, and highly determinative adaptation theories that view human action as more or less a reflex of environment. Historical ecology, along with recent archaeological theory and cultural ecology in general, has revivified the old cultural geography concept of landscape. Bellet emphasized the need to look at actual influences without prejudging in order to understand this. This is doubly true if we wish to maintain or revive traditional land management techniques such as controlled burning. Impartial analysis and understanding must preempt the field from the sort of naive, condemnatory judgment that we critique elsewhere in this theory. Sawyer was far ahead of his time and only recently has his concept of landscape broadened its scope and exploded into widespread use. This has followed on the realization noted even the simplest people not only know an incredible amount about their environment, but also profoundly modify them. Let's see what is postmodernism. A fairly new paradigm in contemporary social thought is postmodernism. The postmodernists were critical of all modern things and argued that science itself was flawed. Extreme postmodernism took a very subjective and anti-scientific stance in opposition to objectivism of the modern world. This view holds that science is subjective, thus our interpretations of culture are also subjective. Postmodernists argue that there is no objective reality and that fact lists have no place in anthropology. This approach is not science but have evolved within studies of literature, religion and expressive behavior, insofar as it directs our attention to interpreting and understanding cultural practices. It is a valuable contribution. Anthropology and human ecology are scientific sciences. Human ecology does not have its own theory. It uses ideas taken from other disciplines, modified as needed and then applied to problems. Any approach that can be used to learn about how people and cultures interact with the environment will serve. If something does not inform us, it will be abandoned and another procedure used. This flexibility in research approach is a strength and helps us to better understand humans, their culture and their relationship with the environment. Now let's summarize the module. So far we have understood that communities occupy most of the diverse environments on the planet and cultural ecology is the story of how they do that. Some do it well, others less so. In any case, humans are the key species in most environments and whatever their practices, we can learn from them. The study of human interactions with their environment is called human ecology, with human biological ecology emphasizing the biological aspects of adaptation including evolution, and cultural ecology, emphasizing the cultural aspect. Human ecology generally falls within anthropology and the study of human through time and space. Human ecology has a long history with many ideas and concepts being proposed. The idea of environment dictating culture, environmental determinism of culture evolving through stages and of cultures operating within environmental parameters, that is possibilism, have been proposed, rejected, refined, argued and reconsidered. However, modern human ecology, including cultural ecology, was founded by Julian Stewart, who argued that human adaptation was an interplay among environmental biology and culture. Today, most human ecologists utilize the principle of empirical science in the investigations and approach it in a number of ways. These include humans as animals procedure that relies heavily on biological principles. Some view humans as rational choosers and use a functional and materialist approach. Others emphasize political processes and the interaction between power and modernization. Thank you.